Namibia is an area with very little light pollution. That is why in this episode of the Colourclass Namibia, the topic of astrophotography will be discussed later on. But before that, we go up in the air by helicopter to photograph Namibia's red dunes from the air. Initially, Alex wanted to come too. However, the payload of our rather small helicopter was limited, and since Alex has already done these flights a few times, he generously let Stephan and me go first.
The play of colours, play of forms through the shadows. The sun rises soon. It is simply a dream in terms of photography and film. And that's why I wish you a lot of fun and bring good pictures home with you.
I don't think you have to persuade us. Very cool.
Awesome.
We have now seen our first location from all angles and continue driving. Namibia is not only very photogenic during the day, at night the country turns into a paradise for astrophotographers. In order for astrophotography to work, a whole set of requirements must be met. First of all, of course, it has to be cloudless. Otherwise, we would not be able to see the stars. Another factor that prevents us from seeing the stars is light pollution. That means, ideally, it is really dark. And, well, we don't just want to photograph the sky. We want to take a landscape photo with a spectacular sky. And I personally cannot imagine a much more spectacular landscape than what you have probably already seen behind me. And what other technical aspects you need to think of will now be explained by Alexander Heinrichs.
We are in Namibia, and here we have some of the best dark territories on Earth. Why? Because there is so little light pollution here. That means it is relatively easy to take beautiful pictures of the stars here. I too have become a fan of astrophotography here in Namibia, and I would like to tell you very briefly what you have to consider. Let's start with the equipment. What is important? We need a stable tripod. I work with the Novaflex Triopod. The best thing to do is not trigger by hand, but with an external trigger so that you do not have to touch the camera, making it absolutely vibration-free. You then need a camera that produces as little noise as possible. Stars are small dots. If we have too much noise in the image, these stars will disappear. Therefore, if possible, use a camera with a good noise level. You also need a very fast lens. I'm working with a 24mm G Master from Sony. This is extremely sharp at f1.4, which means that I can really take pictures with the aperture wide open, and it is still sharp right into the corners. One of the best astro lenses I know. How do you go about this? Quite simply, you have to set everything to manual. Meaning exposure manual, white balance manual, focus manual. Talking about focus, pick one of the relatively large stars in the picture and enlarge it as much as possible. Then you turn the focus ring, and when the star is at its smallest, it is sharp. In other words, always turn the focus back and forth a little until the star is smallest, and then you have found your focus point. What is my workflow? I have to get as much light on my camera sensor as possible, and with as little noise as possible. So, I have to open the aperture as far as possible. To do this, you have to check beforehand, preferably at home, when your lens is sharpest. With the 24mm G Master, I know that I can take pictures at aperture 1.4 and it is still sharp in the corners. The second point is the shutter speed. What shutter speed do I have to choose? That too is dependent on the lens, more precisely depending on the focal length. because we have the problem that the Earth is turning. If I expose too long, the dots, meaning the stars, become dashes, and we don't want that. Roughly, there is the so-called 500 rule, which means 500 divided by the focal length is the number in seconds that I can expose. So with 25mm or with my 24mm lens, it is 21 seconds accordingly. Eventually, there is the EIZO sensitivity, and it is set as low as possible to get the correct exposure. Nevertheless, you will have noise in your picture. In order to reduce the noise, we take several pictures. In other words, I take about 20 frames per picture, which are later added together in Photoshop or suitable programs such as Starry Landscape Stacker or Deep Sky Stacker. These programs can combine the sky of these images wonderfully and can differentiate between the noise and the stars to then cancel out the noise. The sun is setting slowly. Time for me to take the first test shots, and then I would say, have a look at the result.